When a stranger with a hidden past knocks on a widow's farmhouse door, Maple Glen's quiet is shattered. But just as love begins to bloom, danger from the city follows close behind. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun stretched across the hills surrounding Maple Glen, a town so small it barely made it onto state maps. One blinking traffic light, 2 diners, and more quiet than most people knew what to do with. Lena Hart, 38, stood in her front, yard-hanging laundry, the breeze catching her chestnut hair. Her hands, rough from years of work, moved with practiced efficiency. The white sheets snapped in the wind as she pinned them to the line, a task she'd done 1,000 times since moving to this farmhouse after her husband died. The rumble of an approaching vehicle made her look up. In Maple Glen, everyone knew, everyone's car by sound alone. This one was unfamiliar, a beat-up blue truck that had seen better days. It slowed as it approached her gate, gravel crunching under its tires. The man who stepped out didn't belong here. Despite the faded jeans and worn flannel shirt, there was something about the way he carried himself. His dark hair was cut shorter on the sides than most men around these parts, and though his face had a few days' worth of stubble, his eyes were sharp. Assessing. He approached the fence slowly, like someone who wasn't sure of his welcome. "Morning," he said, his voice deep but uncertain. "I heard in town you might have a room to rent." Lena squinted at him, shielding her eyes from the sun. She'd put the ad in the general store 2 weeks ago, figuring no one would answer. Nobody new ever came to Maple Glen unless they were running from something or towards someone. This man didn't. Looked like he was running toward anything. "Third door on the left," she said finally with a shrug. "Don't touch the good kettle. Rent's due first of the month." He blinked, clearly surprised by her directness. "Just like that?" "You want a background?" "Check. This isn't the city. $200 a month you help with firewood and repairs." She turned back to her laundry. "Or keep driving, your choice." The man stood there for a moment, then nodded. "I'll take it. Name's Michael. Michael Davis." Lena didn't turn around. "Lena. Hart. Bathrooms shared, dinners at 6 if you want it." That was how it started. No fanfare, no lengthy introductions, just a woman who'd learned to expect little from life, and a man who seemed grateful for the same. Caleb, who now called himself Michael, unpacked his few belongings in the small, clean room Lena had shown him. A bed with a quilt that smelled of sunshine, a wooden dresser with a mirror, a window that looked out onto rolling hills, and a sky bigger than any he'd seen in years. He sat on the edge of the bed and put his head in his hands. 6 months ago, he'd been in a corner office on the 47th floor of the Royce Financial Building in Manhattan. Now he was in a widow's farmhouse, hiding from the wreckage of his former life. The scandal had hit like a hurricane. Accusations of fraud, of manipulating markets, of betraying clients. None of it true, but the evidence had been manufactured so carefully that even his closest allies turned away. Someone had set him up, but by the time he realized what was happening, it was too late. The damage was done. Rather than fight a losing battle, he'd disappeared. Let them think he was guilty. Let them have the company he'd built from nothing. He just needed peace. Time to think, to plan his next move. And now here he was in Maple Glen, a place so removed from his world that it might as well be another planet. There was a knock at his door. Lena stood there holding a stack of towels. "These are yours to use," she said. "Laundry day is Saturday." "Thank you," he replied, taking them from her. Their fingers brushed briefly, and he noticed how calloused her hands were. Working hands. Honest hands. She nodded, then hesitated. "What brings you to Maple Glen, anyway?" "Not exactly a tourist destination." Caleb had prepared for this question. "Between jobs needed a change of pace. I've got skills, carpentry, mechanics. Figured I could pick up work while I figure things out." Lena's expression didn't change. "Well, there's plenty that needs fixing around here if you're looking to start somewhere. I noticed your back porch steps are loose," he offered. "I could fix those tomorrow." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or suspicion. But she just nodded. "Tools are in the shed. Don't move anything without asking first." After she left, Caleb went to the window and watched her walk back to her garden. She moved with purpose, this woman who didn't ask too many questions, who seemed to understand that sometimes people just needed a place to land. For the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe. The next week fell into a pattern. Caleb woke before dawn, made coffee in the kitchen, careful never to touch what he learned was the good kettle, a blue enamel one that sat on the back of the stove, and went outside to chop wood or work on repairs before the heat of the day set in. Lena noticed how he attacked the wood pile, splitting logs with a force that seemed fueled by something darker than simple exertion. There was anger there, pain. She recognized it because she'd once chopped wood the same way in the months after Tom died. She watched him from the kitchen window as he fixed the back steps, his movements efficient despite his obvious unfamiliarity with physical labor. His hands had blisters the first few days, now they were starting to callous. "You never did this kind of work before, did you?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch, the day's heat finally giving way to a cool breeze. Tensed slightly. "What makes you say that? Your hands, they're getting tougher, but they weren't a working man's hands when you arrived." Caleb looked down at his palms, now rough with developing calluses. "I worked with my head more than my hands," he admitted. "But I'm finding I like this better." Lena sipped her tea. "What did you do before?" "Finance." It wasn't a complete lie. "Turned out I wasn't cut out for it." Something in his tone made her stop asking questions. She understood boundaries. Her own were built high and strong after Tom's death 5 years ago. The accident had been quick, a truck crossing the center line on the highway, hitting Tom's car head-on. 1 minute she was a wife waiting for her husband to come home from work. The next, she was a widow identifying his body. After that, she'd carved out this small, manageable life, made candles that she sold at the general store and online, kept to herself, learned to be alone without being lonely. Until now. The first time Caleb made her laugh, it caught them both by surprise. He'd been trying to coax her old tractor back to life, covered in grease and muttering curses, when she brought him a glass of lemonade. When she asked how it was going, he looked up with such exasperated defeat that she couldn't help but laugh. The sound was so unexpected, clear and bright, that he stared at her. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing," he said quickly. "Just, that's the first time I've heard you laugh." Lena looked away. "Don't get used to it. Doesn't happen often." But it began to happen more. Small moments where his city boy awkwardness in country tasks broke through her reserve. The way he jumped when a bat flew too close one evening. How he'd tried to help in her candle workshop and managed to spill wax everywhere. And she noticed how he began to relax. The tension in his shoulders easing. The way he'd sometimes stop what he was doing and just look at the horizon, as if he couldn't believe how far he could see. At night, though, she sometimes heard him pacing in his room. Restless, haunted. On those mornings, he'd be at the wood pile earlier than usual, swinging the axe like he was fighting something only he could see. A month into his stay, Caleb drove into town for supplies. Maple Glen's main street consisted of about 12 businesses, including Earl's general store, where Lena sold her candles. Earl, a man in his 60s with a perpetual toothpick in the corner of his mouth, eyed Caleb as he gathered the items from Lena's list. "You're the fella staying out at Lena's place," he said. It wasn't a question. "That's right," Caleb replied, placing a bag of flour on the counter. "Known Lena since she was knee-high," Earl continued, ringing up the purchases slowly. "Good woman. Been through more than her share of trouble." Caleb sensed the warning behind the words. "She's been kind enough to rent me a room. I'm helping with repairs." Earl nodded, studying him. "Tom, that was her husband. He was a good man, straightforward. What you saw was what you got." The implication hung in the air between them. "I'm not looking to replace anyone," Caleb said carefully. "Just needed a place to stay while I get my bearings." "Uh-huh." Earl handed him his change. "Well, folks around here look out for each other, especially Lena." The message was clear. Don't hurt her. As Caleb loaded the supplies into his truck, he caught sight of a newspaper on a stand outside the store. His breath caught. There, buried on an inside page, was a small headline. "Royce financial investigation continues. Former CEO still missing." His hands trembled as he quickly walked away. For a moment, his old life had reached out and touched him, reminding him that no matter how peaceful things seemed here, he was still a man in hiding. A man living a lie. That evening, Lena was quieter than usual as they ate dinner. She'd made a simple stew, and the silence between them felt different. Not comfortable as it had become, but charged. "Everything okay?" he finally asked. She put down her spoon. "Marion at the diner said she recognized you from somewhere. Said you looked familiar." Caleb's heart raced, but he kept his expression neutral. "I've got one of those faces, I guess." That's what I told her. Lena met his eyes. "People come to small towns for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes it's because they're running from something." He swallowed hard. "And you? What brought you here?" "I grew up here. Left for college, met Tom, came back when we got married." She looked down at her bowl. "Stayed after he died because it was easier than starting over somewhere else." Caleb nodded, understanding the unspoken words. Sometimes staying put was its own kind of running away. "I'm not asking what you're running from," she said quietly. "Just be straight with me about everything else. I've had enough lies in my life." The weight of his false name, his manufactured backstory, sat heavy on his chest. But he nodded. "Fair. Enough." Later, as she washed the dishes and he dried them, their routine now familiar, he found himself wanting to tell her the truth, to explain that he wasn't the villain the world thought he was, that he'd been betrayed by people he trusted, that he was hiding not from justice but from injustice. But he remained silent. The truth would only put her in danger, or worse, make her look at him differently. And somehow, in this short time, her opinion had come to matter. As summer deepened, so did the quiet bond between them. Caleb repaired the leaky roof, fixed the garden fence, and helped Lena expand her candle business by building display shelves for the local craft fair. Sometimes he caught her watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice. Not with suspicion anymore, but with a kind of wondering, as if she was trying to reconcile the man who skillfully negotiated with suppliers on her behalf with the same man who still couldn't milk her goat without making a mess. One evening, as fireflies began to light up the dusk, Lena sat next to him on the porch steps, close enough that he could smell the lavender and wax that always clung to her skin. "Why candles?" he asked, genuinely curious about the business she'd built. She smiled slightly. "After Tom died, I couldn't sleep. Used to light candles to keep me company during those long nights. Making them gave me something to focus on, something to do with my hands while my heart figured out how to keep beating." The simple honesty of her words touched him. In his former life, people rarely spoke so directly about pain or loss or healing. "They're beautiful," he said. "You've got a real talent." "What about you?" she asked. "What were you good at in your old life?" Caleb looked out at the darkening fields. "I was good at seeing patterns, at knowing which way the wind would blow before anyone else felt the breeze." He smiled ruefully. "Until I didn't." Lena didn't press for details, and he was grateful. Instead, she stood up. "Come on, I want to show you something." She led him to a small building behind the house that he'd assumed was just another storage shed. Inside, hundreds of candles in various stages of completion filled the shelves. The scent was intoxicating: lavender, vanilla, pine, and fragrances he couldn't name. "This is where the magic happens," she said, a hint of pride in her voice. "I've been thinking, if you're planning to stay a while, maybe you could help me expand. You've got a head for business, that much is clear, and I've got more orders than I can fill alone." The offer stunned him. She was inviting him further into her life, offering a partnership of sorts, trust he wasn't sure he deserved. "I'd like that," he said finally. "I'd like that very much." She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, and something shifted between them. A possibility opened up that neither had expected. The next morning, Caleb woke even earlier than usual. He made coffee, careful as always with the good kettle, and stepped outside just as dawn broke over the hills. For the first time since arriving in Maple Glen, he didn't pick up the axe with anger. Instead, he worked steadily, methodically, splitting wood for the coming winter, planning for a future he might actually want to be part of. From her bedroom window, Lena watched the man who called himself Michael Davis chopping wood at dawn. The rising sun cast him in gold light, transforming him from the haunted stranger who'd arrived at her gate into something else entirely, a man finding his way back to himself. And despite all her carefully built defenses, she felt her heart opening to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they were both being given a second chance. Neither of them saw the black sedan with tinted windows that slowly drove past the farm that morning. Nor did they notice when it turned around and headed back toward town, a man inside making a phone call. "I think I found him," the man said. "Royce. I think I found Caleb Royce." The Maple Glen Harvest Festival transformed the tiny town square into a bustling marketplace. Colorful tents housed local crafts, baked goods, and farm produce. At the center of it all stood Lena's candle display, the one Caleb had built for her. "We've sold almost half the inventory already," Lena said, her eyes bright with excitement. She wore a simple blue dress, a departure from her usual jeans and flannel, and had pinned her hair up. "I've never had this kind of response before." Caleb smiled, enjoying her happiness. "It's the presentation. Quality products deserve quality display." "It's more than that," she countered. "The new scents you suggested, the gift sets for the holidays, those were your ideas." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. In his former life, success had been measured in millions of dollars and market share. Here, it was the smile on Lena's face and the steady stream of customers admiring her work. "Lena Hart, these are just beautiful." Mrs. Peterson, the mayor's wife, held up one of the new pine and cinnamon candles. "And your helper here has quite the sales pitch. Are you too—" She left the question hanging, eyebrows raised. "Michael's my tenant," Lena said quickly. "And business partner," she added, a slight flush on her cheeks. Caleb felt a twinge of something, disappointment perhaps, at how quickly she'd clarified their relationship. But what had he expected? They were friends, maybe. Landlady and tenant. Two people helping each other rebuild their lives. Nothing more. Yet as the day progressed, he found himself watching her more closely. The way the sun caught in her hair, how her rare laughter came more easily now, the gentle way she handled her candles, as if each one carried a piece of her soul. "Michael," Lena called, waving him over. "The Williams family wants a dozen custom candles for their daughter's wedding. I told them you handle the business side." As he discussed pricing and timelines with the enthusiastic family, Caleb realized how seamlessly he'd slipped into this new role, so different from his high-pressure corporate life, yet utilizing the same skills. Negotiation, strategy, building relationships, but honest this time. Real. Later that evening, as they packed up the remaining inventory, Earl from the general store approached their tent. "Great showing today, Lena," he said, his ever-present toothpick moving as he spoke. "Michael." He nodded curtly at Caleb. "Quite the businessman, aren't you?" Something in Earl's tone made Caleb tense. "Just helping out." "Mm-hmm." Earl turned, back to Lena. "Just wanted to tell you that some fella was asking questions about your border here. Showed me a picture on his phone. Wasn't a great likeness, but there was something familiar about it." Lena glanced at Caleb, whose face had gone carefully blank. "What kind of questions?" Wanted to know how long he'd been in town. Who he talked to. Said he was an old friend looking to reconnect. Earl's eyes narrowed slightly. "Didn't strike me as the friendly type, though." "What did you tell him?" Caleb asked, his voice controlled. "Told him I mind my own business and suggested he do." "The same." Earl adjusted his cap. "Folks come to Maple Glen for all sorts of reasons. Long as they don't bring trouble, we don't much care about their past." After Earl walked away, Lena continued packing in silence. Caleb could feel the questions hanging in the air between them. "You going to tell me what that was about?" she finally asked. He stared at the box he was filling. "It's complicated. Always is." She closed the trunk of her car with more force than necessary. "I don't need your life story, Michael, or whatever your name is, but I do need to know if there's danger coming to my door." The anger in her voice surprised him. Lena was usually so even-tempered, so measured in her responses, but now her eyes flashed with a fire he hadn't seen before. "I never meant to bring problems to your doorstep," he said quietly. "I can leave tonight." "That's not—" She stopped, took a deep breath. That's not what I'm asking. I need honesty. Even if it's just enough to know what I'm getting into. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the town square as they faced each other. Caleb knew he stood at a crossroads. Continue. The lie and protect them both from the full truth, or risk everything on the chance that Lena Hart might understand. Not here, he said finally. Back at the house. The drive home was silent, tension filling the truck cab. Caleb's mind raced, trying to decide how much to tell her. The complete truth would not only put her at risk, but might change how she saw him forever. Yet anything less would be another betrayal of the trust they'd begun to build. At the farmhouse, Lena went directly to the porch and sat in her usual chair, waiting. Caleb paced in front of her, hands in his pockets. "My name isn't Michael Davis," he began. "It's Caleb Royce." He watched her face carefully, but there was no flash of recognition. The name that had been splashed across financial news for weeks meant nothing to her. "I ran a large financial firm in New York," he continued. "Royce Financial. We managed billions in investments, retirement funds, corporate accounts." "And you did something wrong," she said. Not a question, but a statement. "No." His voice came out sharper than he intended. "That's what everyone believes, but no, I was set up. Someone inside my company, working with a competitor, manipulated records, created false evidence of fraud. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. The damage was done." "So you ran." Caleb sat down heavily in the chair beside her. "I could have stayed and fought, hired lawyers, made public statements, dragged it through the courts for years. But the evidence they created was convincing. Too convincing, and I was tired." He looked out at the darkening fields. So tired of that world. The lies, the manipulation, the constant pressure to win at all costs. Lena was quiet for a long moment. "That man today, he's from your old life? Probably sent by whoever set me up to make sure I stay gone." He turned to her, his expression grave. "Or to silence me permanently if I look like I'm going to fight back." "Are you going to fight back?" The question caught him off guard. In the months since arriving in Maple Glen, he'd thought less and less about revenge or vindication. More and more about peace, about mornings chopping wood, about Lena's rare smile. "I don't know anymore," he admitted. She nodded, processing everything he'd told her. "Caleb," she said, testing his real name. "It suits you better than Michael." Of all the responses he'd imagined, this simple acceptance wasn't one of them. "You believe me just like that?" Lena stood up, arms crossed. "I've watched you for 3 months now, seen how you work, how you think, how you treat people. That tells me more than any news story." She paused. "But no more lies, even small ones. Not if you're staying." "I'd like to stay," he said. The words coming out before he could consider them. Something flickered in her eyes, relief perhaps, or something deeper. "Then we need a plan. If someone's looking for you here, this isn't over." That night, sleep eluded Caleb. He sat by his window watching the moonlight on the fields, thinking about how quickly life could change. 6 months ago, he'd had everything: success, wealth, respect. Then it was gone, replaced by suspicion and shame. And now? Now he had a small room in a farmhouse, calloused hands, and a woman who knew his real name but still looked at him the same way. It was less than he'd had before, but somehow it felt like more. A soft knock on his door pulled him from his thoughts. Lena stood there in a robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Couldn't sleep either," she said. "Thought you might want some tea." They moved to the kitchen where she put the blue kettle, the good kettle he'd been warned never to touch, on the stove. "It was Tom's," she said, noticing his glance. "He bought it for me on our honeymoon. Said every home needs one special thing that's just for happy occasions. I'm honored you're using it now," Caleb said softly. Lena tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Seems appropriate. Truth is a kind of special occasion, isn't it?" As they sipped their tea in the dim kitchen, Caleb found himself studying her face. Without her usual reserve, Lena looked younger, more vulnerable. But there was strength there too, in the set of her jaw, the directness of her gaze. "Tell me about him," Caleb said. "Tom." Her eyes widened slightly at the unexpected request. "He was straightforward, kind. the opposite of complicated. A small smile. He could fix anything mechanical but couldn't manage a checkbook to save his life. Loved country music and hated mushrooms. You still miss him. Every day, she admitted, but differently now. It's more like gratitude for the time we had. She met his eyes. What about you? Was there someone before all this? Caleb thought about the women he'd dated in New York. Beautiful, ambitious, perfect for his arm at charity galas and corporate events. None. Had seen beyond his success, his name, his wealth. No one real, he answered truthfully. No one who would have followed me here. Something passed between them then, an understanding, a recognition. Two people who had lost different worlds, but somehow found themselves in the same place. We should get some sleep, Lena said finally, rising from the table. Tomorrow's going to be busy. At her bedroom door, she turned back to him. Good night, Caleb, she said, his real name sounding right on her lips. Good night, Lena. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. Caleb woke early as usual, but for the first time since arriving, he didn't immediately head for the woodpile. Instead, he sat on the porch steps, coffee in hand, and allowed himself to think about the future. Could he build a life here, in this small town? Keep helping Lena with her business. Maybe start something of his own. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. To start again with nothing but his mind and his hands. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted his thoughts. A black sedan, the same one that had driven by the farm the day before, was coming up the drive. Caleb stood slowly, setting down his coffee mug. He heard the screen door open behind him and knew Lena had seen it too. Stay inside, he said without turning. Not a chance, she replied, coming to stand beside him. The car stopped, and a man in an expensive suit stepped out. Victor Reed, Caleb's former CFO, and the last person he'd expected to see in Maple Glen. Caleb Royce, Victor called, walking toward the porch. You're a hard man to find. That was the idea. Caleb moved slightly, positioning himself between Victor and Lena. What are you doing here, Victor? We need to talk. Victor glanced at Lena, his expression dismissive. Privately. Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of Lena. Victor raised an eyebrow but shrugged. Have it your way. The board wants you back. Of all the scenarios Caleb had imagined, this wasn't one of them. What? The evidence against you has been discredited. James Sullivan confessed to falsifying records on behalf of our competitors. Victor straightened his tie. Your name has been cleared. The company is suffering without you. The board is prepared to offer a very generous package to bring you back as CEO. The news hit Caleb like a physical blow. Cleared. His reputation restored. His old life available again. Just like that. He felt Lena tense beside him. You could have called, Caleb said, stalling for time as his mind raced. Victor smiled thinly. Would you have answered? Besides, this isn't a phone conversation. This is your life we're talking about, your company, everything you built, everything he built. The words echoed in Caleb's mind as he looked around at the farmhouse, the fields, the woman standing silently at his side. In the months since arriving in Maple Glen, he'd started building something else entirely. I need time to think, he said finally. Of course. Victor reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. My cell number. I'll be at the Willowbrook, in the next town over. The board needs your answer by the end of the week. He glanced around, his disdain for the rural setting evident. Though I can't imagine what's keeping you here. After Victor drove away, Caleb and Lena stood in silence, the implications of this new development hanging heavy between them. You should go, Lena said finally, her voice carefully neutral. It's your life, your name. You deserve to have them back. Caleb turned to look at her, trying to read her expression. Is that what you want? For me to go? What I want doesn't matter, she said, turning to go back inside. But he caught her arm gently. It matters to me. Their eyes met, and for a moment all the unspoken feelings of the past months rose to the surface, the careful friendship that had grown into something neither had been willing to name. I need to check on my candles, she said, pulling away. Take your time. Think about what you want. As she walked into the house, Caleb was left wondering if what he wanted was even possible anymore. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. Caleb continued his chores around the farm, chopped wood, helped in the candle workshop. But there was a new distance between him and Lena, a careful politeness that hadn't been there before. They both knew he was making a decision that would change everything. On the third morning after Victor's visit, Caleb drove into town. He needed space to think, away from the farmhouse and Lena's carefully neutral expression. At the diner, Marion served him coffee with a knowing look. "Trouble in paradise?" she asked, nodding toward the window where Lena's truck could be seen, parked outside the general store. "It's complicated," Caleb replied. Marion refilled his cup. "You know, when Tom died, that girl shut down completely. Went through the motions, but it was like watching a ghost. Then you showed up, and little by little she started coming back to life." She fixed him with a stern gaze. "Just something to consider." Caleb nodded, watching as Lena emerged from the store, carrying boxes to her truck. She was talking to someone, a tall man he hadn't seen before. They seemed friendly, laughing together as the man helped her load her supplies. An unexpected jealousy flared in Caleb's chest. Who was this man? A local? Someone from her past? He paid for his coffee and walked across the street, approaching just as the man was saying goodbye to Lena. "Caleb," she said, seeming surprised to see him. "This is David Walker. He just moved to town to take over the veterinary practice." "David, this is Caleb, the famous business partner," David said, smiling as he shook Caleb's hand. His grip was firm, his manner open and friendly. "Lena was just telling me about your candle business. Sounds like you two make a good team." "We did," Caleb said, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "Lena does most of the real work." David seemed to sense the tension. "Well, I should get going. Nice to meet you, Caleb. Lena, don't forget to bring Rusty in for his shots next week." After he left, Lena turned to Caleb, her expression unreadable. "I need to get these supplies back to the workshop. We have that big order for the Williams wedding, remember?" "I remember." He helped her finish loading the truck, their movements awkward where once they had been synchronized. "Who's Rusty?" "My dog," she replied, giving him an odd look. "The one you feed scraps to every morning." Caleb felt foolish, of course. The old golden retriever that slept on the porch and followed Lena everywhere. "Right. Sorry." She studied him for a moment. "Are you jealous of David?" "No," he said too, quickly. Then more honestly, "Maybe I don't know what I'm feeling right now, Lena." She sighed, leaning against the truck. "That makes two of us." That evening, as the sun set over the fields, Caleb found Lena in her workshop. The scent of lavender and warm wax filled the air as she carefully poured melted wax into molds. "You can we talk?" he asked from the doorway. She nodded without looking up, her hands steady as she worked. Caleb entered the small space, suddenly aware of how intimate it felt. This room that held so much of Lena's heart and history. "I spoke with Victor today," he began, "about the offer." Now she did look up, her eyes meeting his. "And?" "I told him I needed to negotiate some terms." Confusion crossed her face. "Terms?" "I'll return as CEO, but only for 1 year. Long enough to stabilize the company, implement new safeguards, and train my replacement." Caleb moved closer to her workbench. "After that, I'm coming back here, if that's still an option." Lena set down the pitcher of wax, her expression a mixture of disbelief and something that looked like hope. "Why would you do that? Give up everything you worked for?" "Because I've found something more valuable here." He took a deep breath. "I've found peace, purpose, a chance to be a man. I actually like being." Another step closer. "And I've found you." The words hung in the air between them. Lena's eyes widened slightly. "Caleb," she began, but he continued. "I know it's too soon. You're still healing from losing Tom, and I'm just starting to figure out who I am without all the trappings of my former life. But these months with you, they've meant more to me than all my years of success in New York." Lena was very still, watching him with an intensity that made his heart race. "So, what are you saying?" she asked quietly. "I'm saying I want to come back Not just to Maple Glen, but to this farm, to the candle business, to you, if you'll have me." She looked down at her hands, working hands, honest hands, then back up at him. "What if I said no? What if I said I needed time?" The question stung, but Caleb nodded. "Then I'd respect that. I'd still come back to Maple Glen after the year was up, find my own place, my own path. But I'd hope that eventually—" "You'd hope?" she repeated softly. "Yes." Lena moved around the workbench slowly, stopping just in front of him. "When would you leave?" "Tomorrow," he said, the word painful to speak. "Victor's arranged for a corporate jet to fly out of Burlington. I'd be back in New York by tomorrow night." "1 year is a long time," she murmured, looking up at him. "A lot can change." "Some things won't," he promised, daring to reach out and take her hand. "How I feel about this place, about the life I've found here, about you." For a long moment, she just looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she squeezed his hand. "I'll be here when you get back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But Caleb, I need you to be sure, because I can't lose someone else I care about. I won't survive it a second time." The admission that she cared, that she was afraid of losing him, broke something open in Caleb's chest. Without thinking, he pulled her into his arms, breathing, in the scent of lavender and wax that was uniquely Lena. "I'll come back," he promised against her hair. "Nothing in New York can keep me away now that I know what's waiting for me here." Lena pulled back slightly to look at him, her eyes shining, with unshed tears. Then, in a movement that surprised them both, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, tentative, a promise more than a passion. But as Caleb's arms tightened around her, deepening the kiss, they both knew that, whatever happened next, there would be no going back to the careful friendship they'd maintained until now. "I should finish these candles," Lena said when they finally parted, her cheeks flushed. Caleb nodded, reluctant to let her go, but understanding her need for space to process what had just happened between them. "I'll make us some dinner," he offered. He walked back to the house. Caleb felt lighter than he had in months. The decision he'd been dreading had become clear the moment he'd admitted the truth, not just to Lena, but to himself. New York, Royce Financial, his old life, they were his past. This farm, this town, this woman, they could be his future, if only he could navigate the year ahead without losing everything he'd just found. In the fading light, he didn't notice the figure watching from the edge of the property. A man in a dark suit speaking quietly into a cell phone. "He's coming back," the man said, "but there might be a complication. A woman, he seems attached." A pause. "Yes, sir, I understand. I'll handle it." New York City welcomed Caleb Royce back with a cold, drizzling rain. As the corporate car whisked him from the private airfield to his penthouse apartment, he stared out at the gleaming skyscrapers and crowded streets. 6 months ago, this had been his world. Now it felt like a foreign country. His apartment was exactly as he'd left it, sleek, modern, impeccably decorated, and utterly impersonal. No plants had died in his absence because there were no plants. No mail had piled up because his assistant had handled it all. It was as if he'd never left, and somehow that bothered him more than anything. "Welcome back, Mr. Royce," said the doorman as Caleb entered the building. "Thank you, George," he replied, surprised he remembered the man's name. In his previous life, people like George had been nearly invisible to him. The elevator whisked him to the top floor. Inside his apartment, he set down his single suitcase, so much less than he'd left with, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. The lights of Manhattan sparkled below, but all he could think about was the view from Lena's porch. Stars you could actually see, hills rolling into darkness. Simplicity. His phone buzzed with a message from Victor. "Board meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Car will pick you up at 8. Just like that, his old life was reclaiming him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small wooden box Lena had pressed into his hands just before he left. Inside was a candle, lavender and vanilla, his favorite of her scents. Attached was a simple note. "So you don't forget what's waiting." As if he could forget, back in Maple Glen, Lena moved through her days with a strange emptiness, The house felt too quiet without Caleb chopping wood at dawn or whistling tunelessly while he fixed something. His absence was a presence in itself, a constant reminder of what had been and what might still be. She tried to focus on her candle business, which was thriving thanks to the systems Caleb had put in place. Orders came in steadily through the website he'd created for her. The display shelves he'd built stood in Earl's store, now fully stocked for the holiday season. "Heard from your city boy?" Earl asked one morning as she delivered a fresh batch of candles. "He's not my anything," Lena replied automatically. Then, more honestly, "He called last night. He's settling in." Earl nodded, arranging the candles on the shelf. "Never seen two people more determined not to admit they're in love. Reminds me of me and Martha back in the day." Lena felt her cheeks warm. "It's complicated, Earl. Always is." The old man smiled kindly. "Just don't wait too long. Life's shorter than you think." After leaving the store, Lena drove to the veterinary office for Rusty's appointment. David Walker greeted her with his usual friendly smile. "How's our patient today?" he asked, patting. "The old dog's head. Lazier than ever," Lena replied with affection, "but eating well." As David examined Rusty, he chatted easily about town gossip, his new practice, the upcoming winter forecast. It was comfortable, uncomplicated conversation. "I was wondering," he said as he finished giving Rusty his shots, "if you might like to have dinner sometime. Just as friends," he added quickly, seeing her hesitation. "I'm new in town and could use the company." Lena thought about her empty house, the long evenings ahead. "That would be nice," she heard herself say. "As friends." David's smile widened. "Great. Friday, I could pick you up around 7. She nodded, already wondering if she'd made a mistake. But why should she sit at home waiting? Caleb was in New York, probably surrounded by beautiful, sophisticated women who shared his world in ways she never could. And he'd be there for a year, a lifetime, really. As she drove home with Rusty beside her on the seat, she wondered if Caleb would actually come back at all. The doubt crept in despite her efforts to keep it at bay. How could he choose this simple life after returning to the excitement and power of New York? The farmhouse came into view, solid and weathered and real. Her sanctuary, the place where, against all odds, she'd begun to open her heart again, to a man who was now hundreds of miles away. Caleb's return to Royce Financial was headline news. The business channels ran special segments on his triumphant comeback after being wrongfully accused. Financial analysts predicted the company's stock would soar. Everyone wanted an interview, a statement, a photo op. He gave them none of it. Instead, he focused on work, reviewing every aspect of the company's operations, implementing new compliance procedures, meeting with key clients to reassure them personally. He worked 16-hour days, took his meals at his desk, and returned to his empty apartment only to shower and sleep. It was easier that way. Easier not to think about what he was missing, who he was missing. "You need to make a public statement," Victor insisted during their third week back. "The board is pressuring me. They want to see the face of the company." The face of the company. "Care's doing exactly what it should be. Fixing the mess that happened in my absence," Caleb replied, not looking up from the financial reports he was reviewing. "The work speaks for itself," Victor sighed. "At least come to the Barton Foundation Gala next week. All our major clients will be there. It would send the right message." Caleb finally looked up. "Fine, one appearance, but no interviews." After Victor left, Caleb swiveled his chair to face the windows of his corner office. 47 floors up, the view of Manhattan was breathtaking. Once, this office had been his favorite place in the world. Now, it felt like a gilded cage. He picked up his phone and scrolled to Lena's name. They talked every few days, brief, careful conversations that never quite captured what needed to be said. He wanted to call her now, to hear her voice, to connect to the life that felt increasingly distant. But what would he say? That he missed her. That New York felt hollow without her. That the success he'd once craved now felt meaningless. He set the phone down without calling. Better to focus on his plan. 1 year, get the company back on track, train his replacement, then return to Maple Glen with his head held high. To Lena, if she was still waiting. "I had a nice time, Lena." told David as they stood on her porch after dinner. It wasn't a lie. He was good company, funny and kind, with none of the complications that came with Caleb. "Me too," David said. "Maybe we could do it again sometime?" Lena hesitated. This was the moment where she should either encourage him or firmly establish boundaries. The problem was she wasn't sure which she wanted to do. "Maybe," she finally said, non-committal. David studied her face in the porch light. "You're still thinking about him, aren't you? Your business partner." She looked away. "It's not that simple. It never is." He smiled gently. "For what it's worth, I'm patient and I like you, Lena, as a friend or whatever you decide. No pressure." After he left, Lena sat on the porch swing, listening to the night sounds. An owl hooted in the distance. The wind rustled through the trees, now nearly bare as November deepened toward winter. Her phone rang, Caleb's name lighting up the screen. Perfect timing, as if he'd somehow sensed another man had just left her porch. "Hello?" she answered, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Hey." His voice, deep and familiar, sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Is this a bad time?" "No, just got home, actually." She hesitated. "I had dinner with David Walker, the vet." The silence on the other end stretched just a beat too long. "Oh, that's nice. How was it?" "Fine." She curled her feet under her on the swing. "Nothing special. How's New York?" "Busy, cold, loud." He paused. "I miss the quiet. I miss—" He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. "Me too," she admitted softly. They talked for nearly an hour, longer than any of their previous calls. Caleb told her about the changes he was making at the company, the resistance he was facing from some board members, his search for the right person to eventually take his place. Lena shared updates about the candle business, the coming winter preparations, Earl's pointed comments about her city boy. Neither mentioned exactly what they were feeling. The space between them filled with unspoken words. "There's a big charity event next week," Caleb said eventually. "My first public appearance since returning. I'm not looking forward to it." "You'll do fine," Lena assured him. "Just don't let them see how much you'd rather be chopping wood." His laughter warmed her. "That's exactly what I'd rather be doing. Your woodpile must be getting low by now." "Earl's nephew has been helping out," she said. "Not as good as you, though." As they said goodbye, Lena felt both better and worse. Better because hearing his voice confirmed that what they'd shared was real. Worse because his world seemed so far removed from hers, and a year suddenly felt like forever. The Barton Foundation. Gala filled the grand ballroom of the Roosevelt Hotel with New York's elite. Women in designer gowns and men in tuxedos mingled over champagne and canapes, their conversations a sophisticated hum punctuated by occasional laughter. Caleb, dressed in a custom tuxedo that had been delivered to his apartment that morning, stood near the entrance, already mentally counting the minutes until he could leave. "Caleb Royce," a smooth female voice said beside him. "The prodigal CEO returns." He turned to find Alessandra Barton, daughter of the foundation's founder and his ex-girlfriend, smiling up at him. In a red gown that probably cost more than most. People's cars, she was as beautiful and polished as he remembered. "Alessandra," he nodded. "Lovely event. Always the charmer," she laughed, linking her arm through his. "Come, everyone's dying to talk to you. The man who was wrongfully accused disappeared, then came back more powerful than ever. It's like a movie script." As she led him through the crowd, Caleb found himself bombarded with questions, congratulations, and not-so-subtle business propositions. He answered politely but briefly, his mind elsewhere. "You seem different," Alessandra commented later when they had a moment alone. "More distant. Where did you go, anyway, when you disappeared?" "Somewhere quiet," he replied. She studied his face. "And found something worth keeping quiet about, I see." Before he could respond, Victor appeared at his elbow. "Caleb, there's someone you need to meet." He nodded to Alessandra. "Excuse us, Miss Barton." As Victor led him away, Caleb glanced back to see Alessandra watching him with narrowed eyes. They had dated briefly 2 years ago, a relationship based more on mutual benefit than genuine connection. She was the kind of woman who fit perfectly into his former life. Ambitious, connected, beautiful. But now he couldn't imagine having anything in common with her. James Wheeler, Victor said, introducing him to a silver-haired man, CEO of Meridian Investments. They're considering bringing their portfolio to us. Caleb shook the man's hand, slipping easily into business mode. This was what he was here for, after all, to restore confidence in Royce Financial, to secure its future before he left it behind. The evening wore on, a blur of faces and names and business talk. By midnight, Caleb's face hurt from forcing smiles. He was about to make his escape when Alessandra appeared again at his side. "Dance with me," she said, more command than request. "For old time's sake." On the dance floor, she moved closer than was strictly necessary. "I've missed you, Caleb," she murmured. "We were good together." "We were convenient together," he corrected gently. "There's a difference," her eyes flashed. "And what? You've found true love since then? In your mysterious hiding place?" The question hit closer to home than she could know. Had he found love with Lena? It wasn't a word they had used, but the feeling that pulled him back to Maple Glen, to her farmhouse, to the simple life they had begun to build. It felt more real than anything he'd experienced in New York. "I found something real," he finally answered, "and that's enough." The next morning, Caleb woke to find his face plastered across the New York tabloids. "Royce romances Barton heiress at charity gala," screamed one headline over a photo of him. Dancing with Alessandra, her body pressed close to his, her smile intimate. "Damn it," he muttered, tossing the paper aside. He immediately thought of Lena. Would she see this? Did the Maple Glen General Store even carry New York tabloids? His phone rang. "Victor, have you seen the papers?" his CFO asked without preamble. "Just, now it's garbage. Actually, it's great publicity. The board is thrilled. Alessandra Barton is exactly the kind of connection we need right now. Her father's influence alone—" "Stop," Caleb cut him off. "I'm not using a past relationship for business advantage, and there is no current relationship to speak of." Victor sighed. "You've changed, Caleb. The old you would have seen the strategic value." "The old me is why I needed to disappear in the first place," Caleb replied. "Look, I'm here to do a job, to fix what was broken and set the company on the right path. That doesn't include playing games with the press or with Alessandra Barton." After hanging up, Caleb stared out at the gray November sky. What would Lena think if she saw those photos? Would she believe there was nothing between him and Alessandra, or would it confirm her worst fears, that he was slipping back into his old life, forgetting what they had shared? He picked up his phone to call her, to explain, but stopped. What could he say that wouldn't sound defensive or worse, guilty? The photos showed nothing truly inappropriate, just a dance between old acquaintances. Making a big deal of it would only highlight its importance. Instead, he sent a text. "Missing the farm today, how's Rusty?" Her reply came an hour later. "He misses you too. Found him sleeping by your bedroom door yesterday." No mention of the tabloids. Either she hadn't seen them or she was choosing not to bring it up. Caleb wasn't sure which would be worse. In Maple Glen, the first snow of the season dusted the fields with white. Lena stood at her kitchen window, watching fat flakes drift down from a steel-gray sky. Winter was settling in, bringing with it a quietness that matched her mood. She'd seen the photos. Not in a tabloid, Maple Glen was too small for that, but online, while checking the candle shop's social media accounts. The story had been everywhere. Caleb Royce, financial genius, dancing with the beautiful Alessandra Barton. They made a striking couple, both so polished, so clearly part of that glamorous world. Lena had stared at the images longer than she cared to admit. The woman was gorgeous, elegant in a way Lena knew she could never be, and the look on Caleb's face. She couldn't read it. Was he happy to be back in that world, with women like that? She hadn't mentioned it when he texted. What right did she have to question who he danced with? They hadn't made promises to each other, not really. A kiss, some suggested feelings, a vague plan for him to return someday. Nothing binding. The sound of a car pulling up outside drew her attention. David's truck. He'd offered to help her winterize the barn today, a task Caleb would have handled if he were here. "Morning," David called as he stepped onto the porch, stamping snow from his boots. "Perfect day for barn repairs, huh?" Lena smiled despite her mood. His cheerfulness was infectious. Perfect if you like frozen fingers. Coffee before we start? In the kitchen, David took the mug she offered, warming his hands around it. You seem down today. Everything okay? Lena hesitated. She hadn't told anyone about her feelings for Caleb, about his promise to return. It had felt too private, too fragile to share. But suddenly, she wanted to talk about it. I saw some photos online, she began slowly. Of Caleb. Michael, at some fancy event in New York, with a beautiful woman. David's expression softened with understanding. Ah, and you're wondering if he's forgetting all about Maple Glen. It's stupid, she said, shaking her head. It wasn't what? Serious? David set down his mug. Lena, I've only been in town a few months, and even I could see there was something between you two. She looked away, uncomfortable, with his perception. It doesn't matter, he's back where he belongs, with people like him. Is that where he belongs? David asked gently. Because from what I've heard around town, he seemed pretty at home here, happier than anyone had seen him in the city, according to the news stories. Lena hadn't thought about that there might be articles about Caleb's time away, speculation about where he'd been and what he'd been doing. Would Maple Glen be mentioned? Would she? Let's go fix that barn, she said, changing the subject. Some things were too painful to discuss, especially with a man who clearly had his own interest in her. 3 weeks before Christmas, a package arrived for Lena. The return address simply read, CR, New York, NY. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a small wooden box, beautifully carved. A note lay on top. Made this in the one woodworking class I could fit into my schedule. Not quite up to Maple Glen standards, but I'm learning. See, the box was imperfect but charming. The work of hands unused to such crafts but trying their best. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a delicate silver chain with a small pendant in the shape of a candle flame. Lena's breath caught. It was beautiful, simple but elegant. Not flashy or ostentatious as she might have expected from a New York gift. It was as if he'd chosen it with her specific taste in mind. She held it in her palm, thinking about what it meant. That he remembered her. That he was thinking about her despite the women like Alessandra Barton, who surely surrounded him in New York. Without hesitation, she fastened it around her neck. That evening, she called him instead of waiting for his usual call. I got your package, she said when he answered. It's beautiful, all of it. You're wearing it? He asked, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Yes. Her fingers touched the pendant at her throat. And the box is perfect too. I didn't know you were taking woodworking classes. Just one on Saturday mornings. The instructor thinks I'm hopeless. She laughed, picturing Caleb, who had mastered complex financial systems, struggling with basic woodworking. You'll get better. That's the plan. His voice softened. I want to be good at building things when I come back. Real things, not just paper fortunes. The words, when I come back, sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire. Crackling in her living room. How's the replacement search going? She asked, allowing herself to hope for the first time in weeks. Slow. The board wants someone like me, but not too much like me. Someone who'll maintain what I've built but won't rock the boat. He sighed. I've narrowed it down to 2 candidates, both promising. So, the timeline is still the same? Yes, he said firmly. 1 year, no longer. In fact, he paused. I was wondering if I could come back for Christmas, just for a few days. If that's okay with you. Lena's heart leapt. Of course it's okay. Your room is still your room, nothing's changed. Except everything had changed. They both knew it, even if neither said it aloud. I miss you, he said suddenly, the words rushing out as if he couldn't hold them back any longer. I miss the farm and Rusty and even Earl's disapproving looks. But mostly, Lena, I miss you. I miss you too, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. More than I expected to. The honesty hung between them, thousands of miles apart, yet somehow closer than they had been in months. 4 more days until I'm on a plane to Vermont, he said. I can't wait to see you. After they hung up, Lena sat by the fire, her fingers still touching the pendant at her throat. For the first time since Caleb had left, she allowed herself to fully believe that he would come back, not just for Christmas, but for good. That what they had started might have a chance to grow into something real and lasting. She didn't notice the car parked at the end of her driveway, its lights off, a figure inside watching the farmhouse with cold calculation. In his New York office, Caleb hung up the phone, a smile lingering on his face. Talking to Lena always had that effect, reminding him of what was real, what mattered. The simple pleasures of a quiet evening, honest conversation, work that left you tired in the best way. He turned back to the stack of reports on his desk, determined to finish them before going home. The sooner he got the company in order, the sooner he could return to Maple Glen permanently. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, expecting his assistant with the budget projections he'd requested. Instead, Alessandra Barton walked in, stunning in a tailored business suit. "Working late?" she asked, closing the door behind her. Caleb tensed. Since the gala, she'd been sending him messages, suggesting meetings, appearing at events he attended. The press had taken to calling them New York's newest power couple, despite his repeated denials to anyone who would listen. "What do you want, Alessandra?" he asked, not bothering with pleasantries. She perched on the edge of his desk, too close for comfort. "Dinner. Just two old friends catching up." "I'm busy," her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You've been avoiding me." "That hurts, Caleb, especially after our lovely dance made all the papers. That was your plan all along, wasn't it?" he asked, suddenly understanding. "The photos, the press. It was never about reconnecting." Alessandra shrugged. "It's good business, for both of us. My foundation gets publicity, your company gets stability, the board loves it, I checked." "The board doesn't run my personal life," Caleb said coldly. "And neither do you." Her expression hardened. "Is this about her? The woman you stayed with while you were finding yourself?" "Oh yes," she added, seeing his surprise. "I have sources. A little farming community in Vermont?" "Really, Caleb? I thought you had better taste." A cold dread washed over him. "You've been having me followed." "Not you. Her." Alessandra stood, smoothing her skirt. "I was curious what kind of woman could make Caleb Royce turn his back on everything he built. She's pretty in a simple country way, makes candles, how quaint, recently had dinner with the local veterinarian, twice." The casual mention of David sent a spike of jealousy through Caleb, but he pushed it aside. The important thing was that Alessandra knew about Lena, had been watching her. The implication was clear, a threat. "Stay away from her," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "She has nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with this." Alessandra's voice was equally cold. "You're throwing away everything for some candle maker. The board deserves to know their CEO has lost his mind." Caleb stood, towering over her. "Is that a threat? A reality check? You don't belong in that world, Caleb. You belong here with people like us, with me." She reached out to touch his face, but he stepped back. "What can she give you that I can't?" "Peace," he said simply. "Honesty. A life that means something, beyond the next deal or headline." Alessandra's face hardened into a mask of anger and hurt pride. "You'll regret this. When you're bored out of your mind in that backwater town, when you're missing the excitement, the power, the lifestyle you've earned, you'll remember this conversation." "Get out," Caleb said quietly. "And if I find out you've continued to have Lena watched or bothered in any way, I'll make sure every financial institution in this city knows what you and your family are really like behind the charitable facade." After she left, slammed the door behind her, Caleb sat heavily in his chair. The confrontation had shaken him more than he wanted to admit, not because of Alessandra's threats against him, he could handle those, but because she'd targeted Lena, sweet, strong Lena, who wanted nothing more than a quiet life and honest work, who deserved better than to be dragged into his messy past. He picked up his phone and dialed Victor's number. "I need to move up my timeline," he said without preamble when his CFO answered. "I want Matthew Harris named as my replacement by the end of the year." "That's impossible," Victor sputtered. The board will never make it possible, Caleb cut him off. I'm coming back for Christmas and I'm not returning to New York afterward. It's time to accelerate the transition. As he hung up, Caleb felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The decision had been made. His time in New York was coming to an end, sooner than planned, but not soon enough. He would go home to Maple Glen, to Lena, where he belonged. He just hoped. He wasn't too late. The snow was falling heavily as Lena drove home from delivering a large candle order to the neighboring town. Rusty sat in the passenger seat, his old eyes watching the wipers sweep back and forth hypnotically. Her mind was on Caleb, coming home for Christmas in just 3 days. She'd spent the morning cleaning his room, putting fresh sheets on the bed, making sure everything was exactly as he'd left it. The thought of seeing him again after months apart sent a flutter of both excitement and anxiety through her stomach. What if things were different between them? What if New York had changed him? What if the connection they'd felt had been nothing more than proximity and circumstance, or worse? What if it had been real? But he'd found something better in the city. Someone like Alessandra Barton, who moved in his world with ease. As she turned onto the long drive leading to her farmhouse, she noticed unfamiliar tire tracks in the fresh snow. Someone had been here recently. Caution made her slow down. Since Caleb had revealed his true identity, she'd become more security conscious, aware that his past could follow him to her door. But nothing had happened in the months since he'd gone back to New York, until now. The farmhouse came into view, looking peaceful in the falling snow. Nothing seemed out of place. Still, Lena parked her truck farther from the house than usual, leaving the engine running. "Stay, Rusty," she told the old dog, who whined but remained in his seat. As she approached the house, the front door opened. A woman stepped onto the porch, tall, elegant, wrapped in an expensive-looking coat that seemed absurdly out of place against the weathered farmhouse backdrop. Lena stopped in her tracks. She'd seen that face before, in the photos with Caleb. "Alessandra Barton. Mrs. Hart," the woman called, her voice carrying in the cold air. "I'm Alessandra Barton. I believe we have a mutual friend to discuss." Lena approached slowly, her heart racing. What was this woman doing here? Had something happened to Caleb? "Where is he?" she asked, fear making her voice sharper than intended. "Is Caleb okay?" Alessandra's perfect eyebrows rose slightly. "Caleb is fine. Better than fine, actually. His transition back to New York has been remarkably successful." The words were designed to hurt, and they found their mark. Lena tried not to let it show on her face. "What do you want?" she asked, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. Alessandra studied her with cool assessment. "To talk. Woman to woman. May I come in? It's rather cold out here." Instinct told Lena to refuse to tell this polished intruder to leave her property immediately, but curiosity and a desire to understand exactly what this woman was to Caleb overrode her caution. "Fine," she said, climbing the steps and unlocking the door. "But make it quick. I have work to do." Inside, Alessandra looked around the simple farmhouse with poorly disguised disdain. Her gaze lingered on the handmade quilt draped over the couch, the mason jars filled with candle wax on the kitchen counter, the worn but comfortable furniture. "Charming," she said, in a tone that suggested anything but. "I can see why Caleb found it restful here. A nice vacation from reality." Lena's patience was already wearing thin. "Say what you came to say." Alessandra removed her gloves slowly, deliberately. "Caleb and I have history. Did he tell you that? We were together before his disgrace and disappearance, and now we're reconnecting." The blow landed squarely. Lena tried to keep her expression neutral, but something must have shown because Alessandra smiled, a predator sensing weakness. "He didn't mention me at all, did he?" she continued. "Not surprising. Caleb compartmentalizes his life. It's one of his many talents." "What do you want?" Lena repeated, her voice steadier than she felt. Alessandra reached into her purse and removed an envelope. "Caleb is being considered for chairman of the board at Royce Financial. It's a prestigious position, one he's worked toward his entire career. The vote happens in January." She placed the envelope on the coffee table. Inside is a check for $500,000. It's yours, no strings attached. All I ask is that when Caleb visits for Christmas, you let him go without complications. No emotional scenes, no promises of a future together. Just a clean break. Lena stared at the envelope, then back at the woman offering to buy her off. "Get out," she said quietly. "Don't be hasty, Mrs. Hart. This is life-changing money. You could expand your little candle business, renovate this place, maybe even move somewhere more civilized." I said get out. Lena's voice was ice now. "Take your check and your lies with you." Alessandra's composed facade cracked slightly. "They're not lies. Caleb belongs in New York, with people who understand his world, his ambitions. Do you really think he could be happy here, making candles and chopping wood for the rest of his life?" The words echoed Lena's own doubts, but hearing them from this woman's mouth made her reject them instantly. "I think Caleb can decide for himself where he belongs. Now leave before I call Sheriff Davis." Alessandra picked up the envelope but didn't move toward the door. "He talks about you, you know, his simple life here, his break from reality. That's all you were to him, a sabbatical, a chance to clear his head before returning to his real life." Each word was chosen to wound, and they hit their mark with precision. But Lena stood her ground. "If that's true, why are you here? Why offer me money to stay away?" She stepped closer to Alessandra, confidence growing. "You're afraid he'll choose this life. Choose me." Something dangerous flashed in Alessandra's eyes. "Don't flatter yourself. Caleb Royce is coming back to New York after Christmas. He's already agreed to the chairman position. I'm just making sure there are no loose ends to complicate matters." "I don't believe you," Lena said, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Alessandra smiled, seeing her uncertainty. "Ask him yourself. Ask him about the board meeting last week, where he accepted the nomination. Ask him about our dinner afterward. To celebrate." She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. "Or don't. Sometimes ignorance truly is bliss." After she left, Lena stood in the middle of her living room, shaking, partly from anger, partly from the cold fear spreading through her chest. Was any of it true? Had Caleb been playing a role here all along, planning his triumphant return to New York while letting her believe he would come back to her? She thought of his phone calls, his text messages, the silver pendant she wore around her neck, the wooden box he'd made in class. Were these the actions of a man saying goodbye, or promises of a return? Outside, she heard a car start up and drive away, taking Alessandra Barton and her poisonous words with her. But the damage was done. Doubt, that most persistent enemy, had taken root in Lena's heart. She walked to the window, watching the expensive black car disappear down her snow-covered driveway. Rusty barked from her truck, reminding her that he was still waiting patiently. With mechanical movements, she went outside, retrieved the old dog, and brought him inside. Then she sat at her kitchen table, staring at nothing, Alessandra's words echoing in her mind. Her phone rang, startling her. Caleb's name flashed on the screen. Her hand hovered over it, suddenly unsure. If she answered, would she be able to hide the turmoil in her heart? Would she demand answers about board meetings and dinner celebrations? Or worse, would she say nothing, allowing doubts to fester beneath the surface? She let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text appeared. "Missing. You today. Can't wait for Christmas, 3 more days." Lena set the phone down without responding. She needed to think, to sort through what was real and what was manipulation, to prepare herself for the possibility that Caleb Royce might be choosing a life that didn't include her after all. And if that was true, she needed to be ready to let him go with dignity. In New York, Caleb frowned at his phone. It wasn't like Lena not to answer or at least text back. A knot of worry formed in his stomach. Was she okay? Had something happened? He dialed Victor's number. "Any news on the boards?" Response? "They're not happy," his CFO replied. "Pushing for Harris as your replacement, this quickly has raised eyebrows. They want guarantees you'll stay on as chairman to oversee the transition." "That's not happening," Caleb said firmly. "I've made my decision. I'm leaving New York after..." Christmas permanently, Victor sighed. At least come to the emergency board meeting tomorrow. Make your case in person, Caleb agreed reluctantly. One more meeting, one more battle. Then he would be free. After hanging up, he tried Lena again. Still no answer. His worry deepened. Something was wrong. He could feel it. Should he call someone? In Maple Glen to check on her? Earl, maybe? Before he could decide, his assistant buzzed him. Mr. Royce, Alessandra Barton is here to see you. Caleb's blood ran cold. Tell her I'm in a meeting. She says it's urgent. About Lena Hart. The words stopped him cold. What had Alessandra done? Send her in, he said, already dreading what was coming. Alessandra swept into his office, looking pleased with herself. I just had the most interesting trip to Vermont, she announced without preamble. Caleb's hands clenched into fists. What did you do? I met her, your candle maker. Alessandra perched on the edge of his desk, exactly as she had during their last confrontation. Charming woman, so rustic. If you hurt her, oh, please. Alessandra waved dismissively. I simply told her the truth, that you're staying in New York, taking the chairman position, moving on with your life. She smiled wickedly. With me, fury rose in Caleb's chest. Those are lies. Are they? The board is offering you everything you ever wanted. Power, prestige, redemption. She moved closer. You and I both know you don't belong in that little town playing farmer. You're Caleb Royce. You were born for this world. Get out, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. And if you ever go near Lena again, I'll destroy you and your family's precious foundation. I have enough dirt on your father's business practices to keep prosecutors busy for years. Alessandra's smile faltered. You wouldn't dare. Try me. After a tense moment, she stood, adjusting her designer suit. She won't wait for you, you know. She's already moving on. That veterinarian seems quite taken with her. The words stung, but Caleb refused to show it. Goodbye, Alessandra. After she left, Caleb tried Lena again. Voicemail. Now he understood why she wasn't answering. What lies had Alessandra told her? How much damage had been done? He picked up his desk phone and called his assistant. Cancel my meetings for the rest of the day and book me on the next flight to Burlington, Vermont. It was time to go home, a few days earlier than planned. Snow fell in heavy curtains across Maple Glen, transforming the small town into a winter wonderland. Streets were quiet, chimneys puffed smoke into the grey sky, and Christmas lights twinkled from frosted windows. It was the kind of perfect December day that belonged on a greeting card. But inside her farmhouse, Lena felt none of the season's joy. She moved mechanically through her workshop, fulfilling the last of her holiday orders, her mind replaying Alessandra Barton's visit over and over. Lena? You in there? Earl's voice called from outside the workshop door. She opened it to find the old shopkeeper stamping snow from his boots. Earl, what brings you out in this weather? Needed to drop off these shipping boxes you ordered. He studied her face with concern. You look like you haven't slept. I'm fine, she said automatically, just busy with Christmas orders. Earl wasn't fooled. Uh-huh. And I suppose that fancy car I saw leaving your place yesterday has nothing to do with it. Lena stiffened. You saw her? Hard to miss a car like that around here. Earl set the boxes down on her workbench. New York plates. Driver looked like she stepped out of one of those fashion magazines. He raised an eyebrow. Friend of your city boy, I'm guessing. The question hung in the air between them. Lena turned away, busying herself with arranging candles. Something like that. Must have been important for her to drive all this way in a snowstorm. Earl's tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp. Especially right before Christmas, Lena's hands stilled. She said she and Caleb are together. That. He's staying in New York permanently, taking some big position there. Earl nodded slowly. And you believed her? I don't know what to believe anymore, Lena admitted, her voice catching. She knew things, Earl, about his work, his plans. People lie for all sorts of reasons, the old man said, especially when they want something that belongs to someone else. His simple wisdom gave Lena pause. What if Alessandra had been lying? What if her visit was meant to drive a wedge between her and Caleb? But then why wasn't Caleb answering her texts now? She'd finally messaged him last night, a simple, "Can we talk?" No response, no explanation. "I need to finish these orders," she said, changing the subject. "Thanks for bringing the boxes." Earl sighed but didn't push. "All right. But remember, Lena, some things are worth fighting for, even if it means getting your heart broken trying." After he left, Lena sat heavily on her work stool. Earl's words echoed in her mind. Was Caleb worth fighting for? The man who had appeared at her gate months ago, who had slowly worked his way into her carefully guarded heart? Or was she just setting herself up for another devastating loss? Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in silence. Caleb's rental car struggled on the snow-covered roads leading to Maple Glen. The storm had worsened since his plane landed in Burlington, and what should have been a 2-hour drive was stretching into 4. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing with worries. What had Alessandra told Lena? Would she believe him over the lies? Had he waited too long to make his choice clear? His phone had died hours ago, leaving him unable to call ahead or check for messages. All he could do was press on through the blinding snow, hoping he wasn't too late. As he finally reached the outskirts of Maple Glen, familiar landmarks emerged through the white haze. The old water tower, the town square with its single blinking traffic light, Earl's general store with Christmas lights outlining its windows. It felt like coming home. He slowed as he passed the veterinary office, noticing lights still on despite the late hour. Through the window, he could see David Walker at his desk, phone to his ear. For a moment, Alessandra's words came back to him, about Lena moving on, about the veterinarian being taken with her. Jealousy, sharp and unexpected, twisted in his gut. But he pushed it aside. He trusted Lena. Whatever relationship she had with David was her business, especially since he'd been the one to leave. 20 minutes later, he turned onto the long driveway leading to Lena's farmhouse. The familiar silhouette appeared through the swirling snow, solid, weathered, welcoming. Lights glowed from the windows, and smoke curled from the chimney. Caleb parked beside Lena's truck and sat for a moment, gathering his courage. He'd faced down corporate raiders and federal investigators without flinching, but the thought of Lena turning him away made his heart race with fear. Finally, he stepped out into the swirling snow and made his way to the porch. Before he could knock, the door opened. Lena stood there, her expression unreadable. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. The silver pendant he'd given her was conspicuously absent from her neck. "You're early," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I needed to see you." Caleb's words formed clouds in the frigid air. "Can I come in?" She stepped aside, allowing him to enter the warm house. Inside, everything looked the same. The worn but comfortable furniture, the quilts draped over the couch, the scent of lavender and pine. Rusty trotted over, his tail wagging enthusiastically as he greeted Caleb. At least someone was happy to see him. "Alessandra Barton came to see me," Lena said without preamble, closing the door against the storm. Caleb nodded, unsurprised. "I know. That's why I'm here." She said a lot of things. Lena crossed her arms, maintaining her distance. "About you, about your plans in New York. Whatever she told you, it wasn't true." Caleb took a step toward her but stopped when she tensed. "Lena, please, let me explain." "Explain what? That you're not taking the chairman position? That you didn't have a celebratory dinner with her? That you're still planning to come back here after Christmas?" The questions came rapid fire, each one laced with hurt. "The board did offer me the chairman role. I turned it down." Caleb's voice was steady, his gaze direct. "There was no celebratory dinner. Alessandra and I have no relationship beyond a past that ended years ago." Lena's expression wavered, uncertainty replacing anger. "Then why didn't you answer my messages yesterday?" "What messages?" Confusion furrowed his brow. "Lena, my phone died on the way here from the airport. I haven't checked messages since yesterday morning." The simple explanation hung in the air between them. Lena's shoulders sagged slightly as if a weight was lifting. "Why are you here now?" she asked, her voice softer. "You weren't supposed to arrive until tomorrow." "Because I knew Alessandra had been here. I knew she would try to." Drive us apart. Caleb took another step toward her, relieved when she didn't back away. I couldn't wait. I needed you to know the truth. Which is what, exactly? Lena's eyes searched his, looking for answers. That I'm not going back to New York after Christmas. That I've already named my replacement at Royce Financial. That I've sold my penthouse and most of my possessions. He took a deep breath. That if you'll have me, I want to stay here, in Maple Glen, with you. The words she'd been longing to hear, yet now that they were spoken, Lena felt a new fear rise within her. What if you change your mind? What if you miss your old life? Your world is so different from mine, Caleb. It was never really my world, he said quietly. I built a life based on what I thought success should look like, but I was never happy there. Not really. He gestured around them. This simple life, this honest work, this community, this is where I found peace. Lena's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. You can't just walk away from everything you built. Your company, your reputation. Watch me, he interrupted, gently. In fact, I already have. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I had this with me on the plane. Was going to wait until Christmas, but he opened it to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. I'm done waiting, Lena. I'm done letting fear or doubt or other people's expectations dictate my life. I love you. I want to build a life with you, right here in Maple Glen. Lena stared at the ring, then back at his face. Caleb, you don't have to answer now, he said quickly. I know this is sudden. I know we still have a lot to figure out. But I needed you to know where I stand. That woman, Alessandra, she has no place in my life. My future is here. If you want me. The tears Lena had been holding back spilled over. I do want you, she whispered. I've been so afraid of believing in this, in us, only to lose you back to that world. You won't lose me, he promised, stepping close enough to finally take her hands in his. I'm done running. From my past, from my feelings, from what I really want. She looked up at him, seeing the honesty in his eyes, the openness on his face. This was not the guarded man who had arrived at her gate months ago. This was someone who had found his way home. Yes, she said simply. Yes to the ring? He asked, hope lighting his features. Yes to all of it. To you staying. To building a life together. She smiled through her tears. To the ring too, I suppose. Caleb slipped the diamond onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms. Their lips met in a kiss that felt like both. A beginning and a homecoming. Tender yet passionate, filled with promise. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the farmhouse, warmth and hope bloomed like spring after a long winter. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having passed in the night. Sunshine sparkled on fresh snow, turning Maple Glen into a glistening wonderland. In Lena's farmhouse, their farmhouse now, Caleb woke early as always. But instead of heading outside to chop wood, he lay still, watching Lena sleep beside him. Her face was peaceful, one hand tucked under her cheek, the diamond on her finger catching the early light. He slipped quietly from bed, careful not to wake her, and padded to the kitchen. As he made coffee, using the good kettle that was now as much his as hers, he looked out the window at the snow-covered fields stretching toward distant hills. This view, this simple moment of quiet morning ritual, was worth more than all he'd left behind in New York. Rusty trotted in, nails clicking on the wood floor. Caleb scratched behind the old dog's ears. Merry Christmas, boy. Want to help me with something? By the time Lena awoke an hour later, Caleb had built a fire in the living room, set fresh coffee on the table, and was waiting with a mysterious smile. What are you up to? She asked, wrapping her robe tighter against the morning chill. Come see, he said, taking her hand and leading her to the front door. Outside on the porch, wrapped in a huge red bow, stood a gleaming wood splitter, top of the line, powerful enough to handle even the toughest. Logs Lena burst out laughing. A wood splitter, that's your romantic Christmas gift? Well, I figured if I'm going to be chopping wood for the rest of my life, I might as well do it efficiently. His eyes twinkled with humor. Don't worry, there's a proper gift under the tree too. I love it, she said, still laughing. It's perfectly you. As they turned to go back inside, a car pulled up the driveway, David Walker's truck. Caleb tensed slightly, old insecurities surfacing despite himself, but Lena squeezed his hand reassuringly. "I invited him for Christmas breakfast," she explained, "along with Earl and a few others. Hope that's okay. They're all curious about the man who chopped wood at dawn." Before he could respond, David called out, "Merry Christmas!" He approached the porch, carrying a small gift and a covered dish. "Hope I'm not too early." "Right on time," Lena assured him, then turned to Caleb. "David's been a good friend these past months. He kept Rusty healthy and kept me from wallowing too much while you were gone." The simple explanation, delivered with such openness, dissolved Caleb's remaining doubts. This was Maple Glen, where relationships were straightforward, where people said what they meant. "No hidden agendas, no power plays." "Thanks for that," Caleb said, extending his hand to the vet, "for looking after them both." David shook it firmly, his smile genuine. "Just doing my job. Though I have to admit, I'm glad you came back. She wasn't the same without you." The honest admission surprised Caleb. In New York, such straightforwardness would have been seen as weakness. Here it was simply the truth. More cars arrived. Earl and his wife Martha, the Williams family whose daughter's wedding Lena had, made candles for others from town who had become friends over the months. Soon the farmhouse was filled with conversation and laughter, the scent of coffee and cinnamon rolls, the warmth of community. Caleb moved among them, no longer the outsider, but a part of this extended family. Earl cornered him by the coffee pot. "So you're staying for good then?" the old shopkeeper asked bluntly. "That's the plan," Caleb replied, "if you all will have me." Earl's weathered face broke into a rare smile. "Seems to me Lena's already made that decision." He nodded toward her. "Ring. But if you're asking for the town's blessing, consider it given. You've proven yourself, city boy." The simple acceptance, coming from the man who had been most skeptical of him initially, meant more than any corporate award or financial success ever had. Later, as their guests departed and the house quieted again, Caleb and Lena sat before the fire, fingers intertwined, Rusty snoring softly at their feet. "Happy?" he asked, studying her face in the firelight. "More than I thought possible after Tom died," she admitted. "I'd accepted that my life would be small and quiet from then on, and it was enough, it really was." She turned to him. "But this is more. You brought something back to life in me, Caleb. Something I thought was gone forever." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing the finger that now wore his ring. "You saved me too, you know, from becoming someone I didn't recognize anymore, from a life that looked successful on paper, but felt empty inside." "So what happens now?" she asked, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Now," Caleb smiled. "Now we build something real. Together." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and gentle. Inside, two people who had each lost a life they thought they wanted sat quietly planning the one they truly needed. As dusk settled over Maple Glen, Caleb Royce, once a headline, now simply a man in love, held tight to the woman who had shown him what mattered most. Not power or prestige or wealth, but this: peace, purpose, and a place to truly call home. And tomorrow, as he had every morning since arriving at her gate, he would wake at dawn and chop wood. Not from anger or pain this time, but from joy. The joy of knowing exactly where he belonged. The end.